30, so we will go ahead and get started. So welcome, folks. So this is the NIRSA Government Affairs Forum, and our presenters are Andrew Chaddick from UTSA and Yvette Kell from University of Missouri in St. Louis. So everybody should be muted, so if you could keep yourself that way unless the presenters ask you some direct questions. If you have any questions or need clarifications, please put those in the chat. I will also post the session evaluation in the chat at the end, so if you could fill that out, that would help our presenters out. Also want to thank our sponsors really quickly. ACE, American Council on Exercise, Canon Design, Full Circle Padding, NSA Fusion, Octane Fitness, Play, Sasaki, True Fitness, and Woodway. And with that, I will turn it over to our presenters.
Can everyone see the PowerPoint? I'm not just the only one. Awesome. Thank you for the thumbs up. Well, welcome everyone. Appreciate you all taking the time to join Yvette and I for our presentation. As Matt said, I'm Andrew, and the better half of this duo is Yvette. And we are both members of the NIRSA Government Affairs Committee, and just really wanted to introduce the committee to you all. It's a newer committee. It's only been around for a few years, and just wanted to talk about what we do and why it's important as recreation professionals to have an idea of what's happening legislatively within your city or state, and federally, of course, moving forward. So this is just a list quickly of the people within the committee. We have our own little House of Representatives, if you will, from every NIRSA region, in addition to a NIRSA HQ member, Aaron. As you see there, Yvette is our fearless leader, co-chair. So if you are more familiar or comfortable talking to someone else other than me or Yvette about the committee, feel free to reach out to one of these fine people. They can definitely answer your questions and help you. And of course, we're here to serve as well. And I was going to let Yvette kind of talk more about the committee and what we do, since she's in charge.
I wouldn't say I'm in charge. So we're Government Affairs has been around as Government Affairs for 4 years now. This is the 4th year that we've been doing it. Prior to that, it was policy and legislation, and the focus of the committee is really to look at what's happening from a state and local level that would be affecting higher education and more specifically affecting campus recreation. Obviously, recently we've been digging more into the federal piece and what is happening from a federal level, that those laws and how those laws trickle down to our everyday work. So an example is the FIT Act, which I know we'll talk about when we get to the policy agenda, but really how the FIT Act, which is a legislation piece that is putting exercise at the forefront and sports at the forefront to help with health costs, how that affects our everyday life and how that affects us from an education standpoint. And then from a higher education standpoint, so a little more globally across a campus, how, say, the new Title IX regulations affect how we work on a daily basis. And some of these things may affect different parts of campus recreation a little more than others. So Title IX, for instance, may have more of an impact on a daily basis with, say, sport clubs than it would with intramurals. Possibly not, but those are just some of the things that we go through and think about. Most recently, we've been trying to put out articles on Connect to get some more information out there about legislation that's happening from a federal level in regards to officiating, as well as a state level, and then working with our member network reps to put things out that help really create a information resource for everybody. So you see our committee charges here, and as much as I would love to read them to you verbatim, I will let you guys read them. But this is what we're here for, is to try to keep an eye on the horizon on what policy out there in legislation can impact the way we do our work, and what that means for us as higher education professionals and collegiate recreation professionals. You want to talk about the policy agenda, Andrew?
Sure. Yeah, so, every year, the committee kind of puts forth their policy agenda. And, like Vet said, we're obviously looking at all different types of legislation, but, the ones we're primarily concerned with are things that are going to impact collegiate recreation and higher ed. So, we're not necessarily concerned with, Texas changing their speed limit, their max speed limit or something like that. While that is a policy, we're not, going to put it on our agenda as something that we're going to look at over the course of the year. So, aiming to figure out what NIRSA, stands behind, and we'll get to kind of the different strategies that we have for that. But again, it's focusing on, promoting and advancing success for both our students and then for us as professionals. And so, we're looking at 4 different categories. Does the legislation fit into one of these categories? So impacting higher ed, really impacting the health and well-being of our communities, social justice and inclusiveness. And then if it, of course, touches any of our strategic value areas as an association, then those are going to pique our interest more so than, like I said, speed limits, or although I guess I could make an argument that has a little bit of effect on our well-being and health, but I digress. So we have these 4 broad categories that we're looking at from a legislation standpoint, and then from there we identify what we're looking at, and then we have action strategies that we recommend to the board and to headquarters for them to do, whether that's advocate, promoting, collaborating, and informing. Vet, can you kind of explain the difference between what we do as a committee and then what the board does, NIRSA?
So when we're talking about advocate, promote, collaborate, and inform, it's really about the level of involvement that we would have from, say, an HQ and a board standpoint versus providing information. There are lobbying pieces that we don't necessarily want to get into, but there's also some smaller actions that could take place, much like signing on to a letter that's going to the Senate or going to Congress, depending on what the issue is. So, for instance, when Title IX was during the comment portion of restructuring Title IX, NIRSA signed on to a letter that was co-sponsored by the American College Education, so ACE, but not this ACE, it's different ACE, by NASPA, by ACPA, by ACUI, by ACUI, a bunch of different associations, and especially higher ed associations, signed on to this letter asking for them to do more local controls for Title IX, because things don't necessarily play out the same in every state and every community. And so those are some of the things that as a committee we look at and determine whether we need to actually advocate for it. So we've been advocating for civic responsibility in voting, which is information that we've been putting out to the membership to make sure you get out the vote, look at your local races, understand what's going on in your local community. And while, yes, there is clearly a big thing that's going to affect the entire nation with the presidential election, really trying to dig into some of the local pieces and the state pieces so that people understand that, yes, the federal piece affects us, but we do need to look at those probably more closely, our state and local elections and our state and local laws and how those affect us. I think COVID has shown us very, very directly how things are legislated and mandated and done differently at every state and within the state in every county differently. And so understanding how the laws are being addressed and how the laws are being enforced in every single area is something we need to know so that we can help our students, we can stay relevant, and we can make sure that we are doing things in accordance with the law for our county and our state. So advocating is very much at a lobbying level. It would be very rare that we would do a whole bunch of advocating in regards to sending information to provide HQ with direction to lobby for certain things. But we will sign on to letters. We have done that with policies that went through Title IX for transgendered athletes and transgendered students and transgendered policies as they relate to competition. And then we do promote is very much about making sure that we're getting out there and providing not just information, but a stance on it. So our letters and our statements advocating that we are against any policies or legislation that disenfranchises a certain group or one specific group. And then our collaboration piece is really working with other associations, which is something we've been doing more and more of over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, working very closely with NASPA, ACUI, ACPA, CUOI, counseling, and I'm losing all my acronyms, but there are a ton of different higher ed groups that we've been working with to help with the health and well-being task force, to help with social justice and anti-racism, and to help with whatever our strategic plans are at that time to make sure that we are we're providing as much impact as we possibly can. And then Inform is really about providing information. And so this is where the committee does what we can to get information out on Connect, make sure we're providing as many resources as possible. And that may be as simple as providing a link to your local policy calendars, if you will, or your local governments. The policy pages, which I believe Andrew will have up next, is really a great source of information that shows you what's happening from a state standpoint and a local standpoint, as well as a federal standpoint. So things that could be happening at the federal level that are then trickling down to the state and the local level or county level, and how that could affect how we do our jobs within higher education. And then how we can actually interact with one another based on the different laws in the different states and the different counties.
And yes, at the end, I am going to show everyone where the policy pages is on the website. So that's just a real quick overview. Thank you, Yvette, again for that, for what we do. But we really wanted to kind of open the floor and talk a little bit about why it matters and why legislation obviously matters. So we have a few examples on here, but I'm curious if anyone within the group can talk about legislation that they are looking at, or that has passed in their state, or even at the city level that has impacted their work. And you can put that in the chat or feel free to speak up. I grant you permission to unmute yourself.
Hey, Andrew, one thing that's popped up, not directly rec related, but the executive order on the diversity training. KU does a unpacking whiteness in the workplace workshop series and has continued to do theirs, but I know we've heard other universities have needed to stop doing that training because of the executive order.
Yeah, that's thanks, Jeremy. That's a great example. I know our system had put out a memo to all of our diversity and inclusion offices, really to stop a lot of the trainings that they're doing, and they're kind of in a holding pattern to figure out how they can redo those without saying anything that was prohibited within the executive order, or they're kind of waiting to see what happens in November and seeing if that doesn't get rescinded. But that's a great example. Vet mentioned the FIT Act, which if you're not familiar with that, that is a piece of legislation that would that you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it had to do with basically taking pre-tax dollars and being able to use pre-tax dollars to fund your gym membership, or even, I think even youth sports participation and that type of thing. So essentially trying to further incentivize the idea of being active and exercising and leading a healthy lifestyle. So certainly that type of legislation, if passed, could help, campus recreation programs across the country in terms of, recruiting new members and talking about how, they can offset these costs through the FIT Act and setting up that type of pre-tax account to pay for those services. That also mentioned transgender bills have been proposed and some have been passed in various states, defining participation based on birth sex or even the opposite of that, based on how a person is identifying and what the rules and requirements are per state. So obviously, those will probably have more of an effect at an NCAA level, whereas even club sports and intramural sports, I think we've always been kind of on the more progressive side of that cause, but that could still play an issue depending on where you are. One of the big ones that I'm looking at is minimum wage increases. Certainly, the idea of moving to $15 an hour at a minimum wage, I know for our department would be very detrimental. I certainly like the idea of giving our students more income, but at $15 an hour, that would really have a negative impact on what we're able to do, how long we're able to be open, types of programs that we can do. So certainly pending legislation has an ability to drastically change how we operate. And then some examples of past legislation. Jeremy mentioned the executive order from past legislation, even the 2018 tax cut that was put through Congress has impacted our ability to make money, in the sense that within that tax cut, it really impacted how unrelated business income is treated at the university level. Whereas in the past, some areas were losing money, some were making money, and it was all kind of thrown into the same basket. It's not the case anymore. So a lot of the revenue that we were generating pre-COVID from external rentals and things like that is now being taxed at an additional rate based on how our financial folks are interpreting that law. And then specifically to Texas, for you and for those in Texas, if you remember, I cannot remember what the specific law was, but essentially it came after the Jerry Sandusky, Joe Paterno scandal at Penn State, where we now are required to have all of our staff, if we're dealing with minors, have to go through a child protection training, which in and of itself isn't a bad thing. But I know when it came out, it certainly was something that we had to reset and say, okay, we need to make sure, how are we going to do this? How are we going to ensure that students are taking this training and doing it, and that we are, holding on to the records, because you have to hold on to the certificates and so on and so forth. So those are a couple examples. Vet, I don't know if you have anything else you want to share as an example, or if anyone else had a pending legislation that they're looking at within their state, or even at a federal level, if you're aware of something.
I'm more interested on the laws that are going to be either changed or things that could possibly turn on its heel come January, in regards to not just Title IX, but many other legislation pieces that are coming out from the Secretary of Education that could change our funding, change the university's funding in general, regarding training and all of those pieces that we just talked about. So keeping an eye on what is going to be happening. And right now there's so much in limbo. We don't know what's happening. I don't know what's happening. Also curious as to what's going to come out from the fallout of COVID and how that might affect state and local laws in regards to mandating vaccinations and or cleaning procedures, or how many people get to be in a certain space for the foreseeable future.
all fun topics. But again, and COVID
like a
is a great
party.
example of why it matters, because, you know, at least here in Texas, there are, you know, decrees from the governor, and then there are decrees from mayors and county judges, and sometimes those don't jive. So being up to date and understanding what you can and cannot do within your facility at any given time is important. So as that mentioned, you know, our committee is going to try to do our best to let the members of NIRSA know about legislation that's happening federally and at the state level. We are working with the state, well, we are working with the region reps to try to provide some of that state specific information to those. I know specifically within Region 4, we, most of our states are not in a legislation period right now. Louisiana did just pass a bill recently related to COVID and liability. So I did send that on, and I know that Matt got that sent out to the Louisiana State Director. So we're trying to communicate as best we can. Within the NIRSA Know that comes out every couple of weeks, there's typically a link in there to the policy pages. We are also putting things out on Connect within the general community. I can't remember what the name of it. I think it is just the first community that you see when you get to NIRSA Connect. We're posting things there weekly about different topics and legislation. The last month it's been pretty heavy on just register and go vote, but we'll continue to do that. And then you can also find the policy pages through the NIRSA website. So I want to share, let's see how I can do that. So within, can everyone see my screen still?
Yes, I was very excited to see Elmo.
Yeah. When you have a 2-year-old, sometimes you have to Google Elmo when you're trying to make an Elmo costume for Halloween. Those things are important. From the NIRSA page, if you go to Discover and News, we are always going to be on the news. These are latest communications. The last one we had was on the 20th. So you could see here policy and legislative updates. If you click on that, you can get access to the full SAHEC, which is, you remember what that acronym is, Yvette?
Student Affairs Higher Education Consortium.
That one. And that essentially will share a lot of information with you. It's a PDF, so I'm not going to open that up, but we get these on a bi-weekly basis, I think. So what type of legislation update is happening, it's going to be within those policy pages. So that is basically the quickest way. If you've, you know, unknowingly sent those NIRSA Know emails to your spam or your clutter folder, this is a quick way to
Unknowingly.
Yeah, unknowingly, quote unquote. That's a quick way to get the policy pages sent to you. And I think that's all that Yvette and I had. I'll just echo Matt, and I want to thank all of our sponsors for making this happen. I think we might have something in the chat. Oh, that's the
that's the session eval.
The session eval. So be nice to Yvette and I. Follow Region 4 on social media. We do have a few minutes. Does anyone have any questions or?
Is there anything that you guys
if you got comments, you can make them now.
Be more mindful of or to keep an eye on?
Yeah, if anyone has something that they would like the committee to look at, we'll be happy to do that. So please reach out to us, put it in the chat, speak up. If you have, you know, bad things to say about me or Yvette, we have some thick skin.
We do. It's all good.
All right, Matt, I don't hear anyone, so I think we're good. Thanks again, everyone, for being here. And like I said, if you have questions or need more information from Yvette or I, please feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Please fill out the session eval. I did take down your names if you listed them in the chat, so that gives us a means to follow up with you if you do have any questions or anything like that, or to follow up with your presenters